day, I'm Derek Fildebrandt, publisher of the Western Standard. Today, we're going to be joined by Alberta Premier Danielle Smith, talking about the fire that's been lit across the prairies here on the independence front. On April 28th, Mark Carney's Liberals were returned to power for the fourth consecutive term. As many of us predicted, this lit the spark for the latest flare-up in the Alberta independence movement. But this time, unlike previous iterations, it seems a lot more serious and seems a lot more credible. It's no longer just a few cranky farmers and ranchers on the prairies who are angry and want away from Ottawa. Now it is obtaining support from a much broader swath of people. It's obtaining support from business leaders and increasingly even political leaders. The day after the federal election, Alberta Premier Danielle Smith announced that she would be amending the Citizens' Initiative legislation, changing the bar for signatures to trigger a referendum in Alberta from what was, for all intents and purposes, an impossibly high level to a still high but achievable level for an issue that animates as many people as the independence movement does. It now seems on almost certainty that in 2026, Albertans will go to the polls and vote on if it wishes to declare independence and become a nation in its own right. To discuss more, we're joined by Alberta Premier Danielle Smith. Premier Smith, thank you for joining us.
My pleasure, Derek. Good to talk to you again.
You have outlined some very clear demands of the new Carney Liberal government and given them a 6-month timeline in which we expect to see actions over words. You called your meeting with Prime Minister Carney a positive first step, but just yesterday he appointed Julie Debruzen from downtown Toronto as his environment minister, to which you responded, "We are being forced to contend with yet another keep it in the ground environment minister. This is a step in the wrong direction." There is still more than 5 months left on your timeline, but what happens from you and your government if that time elapses and there's not been substantive progress?
I hope that doesn't happen. And I not only was that of concern, I have grave concern that Stephen Guilbeault is still mouthing off, even though he's no longer environment minister.
He's just in charge of the media again.
Well, just saying that lying, frankly, saying that the Trans Mountain pipeline is only 40% full and there's no need to build new pipelines. He's dead wrong and he needs to be corrected. The Trans Mountain pipeline is 80% used. It's coming to near a capacity. There's going to be dredging of the second narrows that allows for greater loads to be taken through that passage. And we're already hearing from industry about how the demand is increasing around the world. Now that we can meet new markets, we've got all kinds of refineries that accept heavy oil that want more of it. Not to mention the recent reports coming out of the United States showing that their conventional oil is falling off. And so they're going to need heavy oil to be able to backstop that. And we also see new sanctions on Venezuela and Iran, which are the other two nations that produce the kind of heavy oil the world needs. So I think the worry that I have is the freelancing that we see on the extreme voices in the Liberal caucus. And I don't think we have a very clear idea of whether or not there has been a pivot and a change of direction. I want to see action, not talk. And the talk I'm hearing so far is not encouraging.
Independence has moved center stage in Alberta and increasingly Saskatchewan. Polling shows that the left in Alberta is almost entirely federalist. On the other side, a strong majority of conservatives here would vote for independence, but with a still sizable minority of your party's supporters remaining federalists. You've tried to make the UCP open to both nationalists and federalists alike, with you positioning yourself somewhere in the middle. And so far, that's held together. But as an independence referendum becomes more of a certainty in 2026, how confident are you that you can keep these two warring camps inside of the same party and remain neutral yourself?
Well, the way parties work is that it's a compromise. You pass policy on things that you can agree with, and you are silent on things that you don't agree on. There's all kinds of things that we don't have in our policy book. And I think that the citizen-initiated referenda process is one mechanism to be able to allow for citizens to identify issues that matter and put them to a general vote of the electorate. And so I'm watching those movements just along with everyone else, and acknowledging them is not the same as endorsing them. I think we just have to accept the reality here that there's some really angry and upset Albertans who don't think that there has been a change at the federal level, which is why I think the Prime Minister only has a limited window here to demonstrate a true pivot. What I would hope to see is that I've identified 9 pieces of legislation that need to be repealed or substantially revised in order to send the message that there is a restart in the relationship with Alberta, and also to pave the way for some of the economic corridors and the construction of pipelines. I'll just give you an example. So you cannot establish an economic corridor to Port of Prince Rupert if you're not prepared to build to amend C-69 to build the pipeline so that it's not a 10-year approval process. If you get a bitumen pipeline going to Prince Rupert, you have to repeal the tanker ban, because otherwise you're not able to load it onto a ship. You cannot have a production cap, which is what an emissions cap is. Otherwise, there's going to be no one with the incentive to invest to expand the production in order to fill those pipelines. And you also can't continue to punish the industry who wants to develop by restricting the amount of low-cost power they're going to have, because you've got unrealistic net power regulations. So every single thing I've asked for is in aid of demonstrating that the federal government wants to help us get our product to market, help us find new markets. And so I would look at that as a measure of good faith, that they're willing to work with us. Haven't seen it yet, but the week is still young. We've only just seen the cabinet approved. I should mention that I am hearing very positive words about the new Energy and Natural Resources Minister, Tim Hodgson. I've talked to many members of the industry who are very encouraged that he seems to be the senior minister in that cabinet, and I gather he also was instrumental in helping to finance the Alliance pipeline at one point in the past with his work at Goldman Sachs and other entities. And so that's the yin and yang that we're seeing here. We've got, as I've often said, we've got 2 different prime ministers. We've got the banker who worked for conservative governments and as a pragmatist, and we've got the guy who wrote the book Values, which talked about keeping it in the ground and moving to net zero and de-insuring and debanking the oil and gas industry. And I'm still not quite sure which prime minister we've got.
So, Premier, those are the things that conservatives, even beyond conservatives, most Albertans broadly agree on. We've both sat in caucuses. We've both been to party conventions. We know that what grabs attention, though, is the part that we don't agree on. And that's where the friction comes. I would personally be a bit surprised if the independence issue did not find its way onto the floor of your party's next convention. And the members have to take a side on that. The polling that's available is not among party members, but among UCP voters generally, and that shows a fairly broad support for independence among UCP voters in Alberta. So I gotta maybe just to restate the last question. If I find it difficult to see how right now it's just the process in the hands of Albertans and the Citizens Initiative legislation, and that is a neutral process. I get, but I think it's highly probable that the independence issue is going to be on the floor of the next convention of your party. I'm sure. I know you can't discuss internal caucus meetings, but I'm sure it's been an issue. If this comes to the floor of your party's next convention, though, isn't it going to potentially force the party itself to take a side in the referendum as that's going on?
Well, I hope it doesn't, because I think it would be a violation of the agreement that our 2 parties had when we came together. I've looked at the founding documents, and I've talked to the drafters of those founding documents, and it was a pretty clear compromise to have the PCs and the Wild Rose come together to say that we would be fighting for constitutional sovereignty within a united Canada. And so that is why I think that is just a foundational principle of what the United Conservatives are all about, and why these kinds of issues really need to be put to the general electorate, because you can't have 400 or 500 people coming to a party conference deciding on behalf of 5 million Albertans. There's certain issues that are so important, they've got to be put to the general public. That's the case I'm making to our members. It's the case I'm making to our board. And I think it is that is what the foundational principles of our party are. And so that's why, as leader, I'm taking that seriously. Is why I believe it's my job to fight for a new deal for Alberta within Canada, and to make sure that we take every measure possible to protect our constitutional sovereignty as defined under the Constitution. I've been doing that since the minute I got elected, and I'm going to keep on doing that.
I actually remember during the negotiations, that particular clause was put forward by Jason Kenney, and many of us on the Wild Rose side, we kind of bristled at it. But then he said, like, well, what's your argument with it? And we couldn't really say out loud why we might have had a problem with that clause of it. But I take your point. With your appointment of Nathan Cooper as Alberta's representative to Washington, a by-election is going to be held in Olds Disbury Three Hills. As you're very well aware, that constituency elected a nationalist in 1982 in a by-election. There's some history there. And I'm quite sure that one or more of the constellation of nascent independence parties is going to run a candidate in hopes of repeating history. In your efforts to keep the independence movement or debate over it within the UCP tent, would you welcome an openly nationalist candidate to contest the party's nomination in Old Disbury Three Hills?
Well, I think everyone should vote for the United Conservative Party. So it's up to other party leaders to make the case about why they should earn the vote. But the reason why I think that people should vote for the United Conservative Party is because the reason we have had a change in the entire national dialogue is because of the work that we have done. The court challenges we put forward, the court challenges we have won, and then the election of the United States president, making everybody realize just how poorly Alberta has been treated. And now we see all of the premiers across the country, no matter what party they're from, saying we need to build, having an entire election fought around the issue of who had more credibility to build more projects. That is because of the work that we've done under the UCP, and we're going to continue doing it.
Let me rephrase the question. Assuming a candidate were to pass all the regular vetting issues, bankruptcy, hasn't said anything particularly wild and outrageous, do you expect that the party would or should clear someone to contest that the nomination in that constituency who is openly on the yes side of the coming if independence referendum?
Well, I want to hold all three by-elections together. So I did indicate to the board and to the local riding president that I would be making an appointment there. As you know, under our constitution, I have the power to do that for 4 appointments. And so I've done my vetting over the weekend, and we'll be announcing our candidate there later this afternoon.
Oh, well, all right. Well, we're going to stand by for that news. The day after the Liberals were returned to power, you said, as Premier, I will not permit the status quo to continue. If the status quo, I know you're going to say you don't want the status quo to continue, and you're going to fight for it not to. So I want to preempt that part. If the status quo does, in fact, continue and sufficient progress on your demands is not made, is there a point at which you would lead the independence movement?
No, I would say that's a conversation for Albertans to lead and Albertans to have. And I trust the judgment of Albertans. So I'm watching that process play out. I think my job is to find every mechanism I can to make sure that Alberta has the ability to operate under the rules that the Constitution says. One of the things that we have been looking at actively is if the federal government is going to abuse their criminal law power, which they have been, part of the reason why they have asserted the ability to regulate carbon dioxide and plastics and anything else they would wish to, firearms, is because of a misapplication, in my view, of the criminal law power. I have no problem with the federal government taking action against the criminal use of firearms or criminal actions, but to try to make people criminals by just saying it's a criminal law power, I think that's an abuse. And I recently read a paper on the Canley website saying from 2018, saying the province's choice to not enforce laws that are a violation of their rights is a legitimate balance on the federal power. And so if we can't come to agreements on certain things, you've already seen that that's the direction that we're going. You want to put in an emissions cap? Sorry, we're going to own the emissions data. Think you're going to come on to properties and tell them that they've got to fork over the data? No, we're going to declare them critical infrastructure. You're going to direct law enforcement to confiscate firearms? No, we're going to direct them not to. So you've seen that we've already begun to exercise our authority in those areas, and I intend to do a whole lot more of that if they continue to abuse the powers they were given under the Constitution. What we really need them to do is go after criminals. They need to stop the catch and release that they have. They need to stop the repeat criminals that are going out and creating havoc in our communities. And they need to support the provinces and being able to keep these bad guys behind bars so that they don't cause more carnage. If they're keen on wanting to exercise their criminal law power, that's where they should start. And they should start with, if they're concerned about firearms, stop with the criminal smuggling of firearms across the border, the organized crime, the gang usage of firearms. But there is, under no circumstances are we going to let them continue to pretend that the Constitution says something it doesn't say.
So in 2026, through Citizens Initiative, Albertans are very likely to vote in a referendum to decide if they will declare independence. I know the first thing you learn in politics is don't answer a hypothetical, but I don't think it's a particularly hypothetical to consider a potential yes vote. Right now, the polls show if there's a vote today, no would win. But campaigns have a way of changing things. The Charlottetown Accord was supposed to be a sure thing. The entire establishment of Canada and all of the major parties in the House of Commons all supported the yes side. Yet there was a no rebellion that ended up winning in the Charlottetown Accord. Brexit, it was the same thing, just flipped onto the yes side. In the event of a yes vote, would you lead Alberta through the process of an independence?
Well, I think my job would be to make the case for why we need to have a strong Alberta within a united Canada. That's what I would hope to do.
That's not the question.
I'm just letting you. Well, you're jumping ahead on you're presuming my failure at that, and I'm very optimistic that I'm going to be able to succeed. But the question I would have for Albertans is, what are the issues that we need to make progress on to make them feel comfortable that Canada finally respects Alberta and is on Team Alberta? That's part of the reason why I'm going to be doing a consultation over the next 6 months. I want to find out what the real pressure points are. I suspect I know a lot of them, but I don't know that I know all of them. And so I don't want to prejudge what I'm hearing from Albertans. You can maybe ask me that question in 6 months once my Alberta Next panel is finished.
And I certainly will be. It is a big what if, but it's not among a lot of options. There's kind of two options. It'll be yes and no, and we'll see what potential progress can be made in the meantime. You in your address the other week, you said that any independence vote would have to respect First Nations treaty rights. And I think that's a given on both sides, that would have to be the case. But I want to clarify what you meant by that. Would that mean that First Nations treaty rights would have to be clarified in advance of a vote? Or are you talking more through the established Clarity Act process, where after a clear majority on a clear question, then consultations begin with the feds, the other provinces, and First Nations? Is that what you were talking about, was more the Clarity Act process, or was it that something has to take place in advance of the vote itself?
No, I think the Clarity Act does. The Clarity Act doesn't just apply to Quebec, I think I know that the media likes to think that the movement that we're seeing among grassroots Albertans is somehow offside, but the Supreme Court has already determined that a province does have a right to self-determination. But I think they've also recognized that you can't ignore treaty rights. So I would leave it to legal scholars to give you an answer to that question. All I know is that we don't see the Quebec separatist movement packing up. In fact, the Parti Québécois is pulling at the top. We don't see the Bloc Québécois saying, oh, gee, this is not possible, therefore we're not going to do it. They just elected another 23 members to the House of Commons. And so I would just put it back on the legal community to maybe have that debate and discussion, because it seems to me that the Supreme Court has said something quite clear in the Clarity Act, and that applies to any province who chooses to go down that path.
All right. Premier, I want to be respectful of your time. Thank you very much for joining us today on this most Albertan of topics.
We'll talk to you again. Thanks, Derek.
All right. All the best.